Hello, hello. How's everyone doing today? Tina, LV, Mr. G, Nobaboo. Hope you're all doing well. I was planning things to say, but I really can't recall any of them because I didn't write it down. I am not fantastic at that. But yeah, and in lieu of the big dramatic speech I was expecting to come up with off the top of my head, I've been streaming games for. Is it better? Hold on, let me. Probably. Filters, ducking. Let's try. Okay, how about this? That is entirely silent. Oh my goodness. Oh, it was silent because it was ending. I'm good at this. No face cam today, unfortunately. But anyway, I've been streaming for probably approaching 3 years at this point, and you know, same thing, so often, all the time. It's I think it's time for a little bit of a change of pace. So I came up with this brilliant idea. It's super exciting. I think you're all going to be very what's the word I'm looking for? Enthralled. No. G. You have the subscribe to my only. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, I am going to be trying something new and exciting tonight, and it is probably going to be the most challenging and difficult thing I have ever done on stream. And I'll give you guys a few moments to guess what that might be. And I'm willing to bet no one's gonna get it. Because it's incredibly silly. I mean, I could do shadow puppets and say it's with my dick and you wouldn't know. Maybe my dick is just multifaceted in that fashion, Ellie. Whoa! Dreadful. I feel like that shot's fired. But no. None of those things. It is, drum roll, live reading. Oh, this is gonna be an absolute mess. Oh. All joking aside, this is going to be extremely difficult for me. I also should probably tweak very much a nerd stream, G, but all of them are when I'm here. The book is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, LV. Okay, let's see if... Yeah, that's a bit better in the audio. See, I knew you wouldn't be excited. Sorry. You know, part of the reason why I chose this is because I read this a long time ago for high school or something, and I just bounced off of it so incredibly hard. And I'm not actually sure if it was the book or me. I don't... So, we're going to give this another go, depending on how, bad this is. I might switch off to something very quickly. I don't know. But yeah. LV, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but like books are primarily comprised of writing. You just said like it's not a bad house, just every board in it is rotten to the core. No, the style. Okay. It functions as a book in that it conveys words and ideas. But it does them in a very terrible, stupid, stinky poo-poo head way. But, we'll try this, and if... It's not even ye old English. You can have a very good story with bad prose. But at any rate, enough stalling. Time to make a fool of myself on the most fitting of days. I read Chuck... What? That is certainly... Palanuik? Thanks, Elvie. That's the kind of support and appreciation. Oh, Fight Club. Interesting. I mean... Chuck Podesta. Chuck Podesta. Oh, nope, Chuck Testa. Oh my, JJ, you're making me feel old here. Oh my god. At any rate, enough stalling. Chapter 1. A Shifting Reef. The year 1866 was signaled by a remarkable incident. A mysterious and puzzling phenomenon which doubtless no one has yet forgotten. Not to mention rumors which agitated the maritime population and excited the public mind. Even in the interior of continents, seafaring men were particularly excited. Merchants, common sailors, captains of vessels, skippers, both of Europe and America, naval officers of all countries, and the governments of several states on the two continents were deeply interested in the matter. For some time past, vessels had been met by an enormous thing. I think he didn't want to write the word peen. Oh my god. I am... I am the classiest of people. For some time, vessels had been met by an enormous thing, a long object, spindle-shaped. You might want to see a doctor about that. Occasionally phosphorescent, and infinitely larger and more rapid in its movements than a whale. It persisted for more than 3 hours. This I've not been reading for 5 minutes and I'm already making it. Facts relating to this apparition, entered in various logbooks, agreed in most respects as to the shape of the object or creature in question. The untiring rapidity of its movements. Dreadful. I read that and my mind immediately went to content of joke, fit in mouth. Thank you, Kina. Agreed in most respects. The shape of the untiring rapidity of someone's movements, its surprising power of locomotion, and the peculiar life with which it seemed endowed. If it was a crustacean, it surpassed in all size all those hitherto classified in science, taking into consideration the mean of observations made at divers times. Wow! Why don't you... That is verbose. Rejecting the timid estimate of those who assigned to this object a length of 200 feet, equally with the exaggerated opinions which set it down at 1 mile in width and 3 in length, we might fairly conclude that this mysterious being surpassed greatly all dimensions admitted by the I know this word, I can't pronounce it. I thought you were making a joke, Kina. I'm sorry. Ichthyologists. There we go. Of the day, if it existed at all. And that it did. Interesting. What the absolute... This page changing, it confuses me greatly. It's fine. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. Never mind. I had it backwards. Okay. And that it did exist was an undeniable fact. And with that tendency which disposes the human mind in favor of the marvelous, we can understand the excitement produced in the entire world by this supernatural apparition. As to classing it in the list of fables, the idea was out of the question. Place your bets now, folks. Throw some numbers out. I'll actually make a poll. Maybe one. I'm already more than 1 page in. Byrne writes like he's submitting a peer-reviewed scientific paper. Moby Dick is written by Melville, who is a lot more... No. Elvie. Moby Dick is written by Melville, who is a lot more Dickensian focus on characters over events, but still dragged out over far too many slow-paced chapters. On the 20th of July, 1866, the steamer Governor Higginson of the Calcutta and Burnock Steam Navigation Company. I will refund you. I'll just do it now, because I'll forget otherwise. That is the wrong thing. I need to go there. Manage request. Dana, didn't I already describe your reject? We're 2 pages in, haven't met a character yet. Moby Dick literally starts with "Call me Ishmael." Amazing. Main character syndrome. I'll have to think about that NPC thingamadoodle, you know. Oh, actually, no, that kind of defeats the point. Okay. One moment while I conjure something from the empty... Hey, how's it going, Sam? I hope you're doing well. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you're here for some story time. I'm doing pretty alright. Okay, Kina. The party is passing through a forest, and very suddenly they come into a clearing. The trees on both sides of the path diverge, and the group finds a cottage and various fields dispersed through the clearing, through the fields of the clearing. Moving with the most hyperactive energy you have seen of such a densely packed creature. You see a woman. Oh, my brain has the word and just dropped it. I think I'm gonna restart. Hey, MDH. What's wrong with 20,000 Leagues? Okay. Restarting. The party, while traveling through the forest, the party comes to a clearing in... While traveling through the forest along a path, the party comes to a clearing. The trees on either side of the path split, revealing a small cottage and grouping of farm fields tucked away in the middle of the forest. Swerving between various posts No, no, no. That's what I'm working on right now, Kina. Um, Swerving through the posts of the field, ducking into the house, returning, filled with the most fervent energy of such a densely packed creature you can possibly imagine. You see a woman. The figure is simultaneously endearing and intimidating. Even from this distance, you can tell she is a laborer at least, possibly a fighter. The physique of her short and stocky, muscular figure, not overly muscular, but you question as to whether you would win a fight with this person. But their figure is plainly visible through their movement, through their clothes. And as she turns around to see you, a wild mat of hair flies behind her, and her face alights with a delighted squeal of visitors. She runs over, grabs your hands, and practically yanks your arms off as she pulls you into the picturesque village, Villa Farms. Squealing with excitement, all too happy to share her home and abilities, cooking, martial, etc., with the new friends that have stumbled upon their way into her life. There you go, Kina. How was that? Hopefully, that I would say that's the first one I've kind of cheated on, because like that was more based on you rather than like the name, but at any rate, back to okay. I completely lost my thought. At the very least, it will be very easy to find this because it's only like 30 minutes in. On the 20th of July. Okay. On the 20th of July, 1866, the steamer Governor Higginson of the Calcutta and Bernak Steam Navigation Company had met this moving mass 5 miles off the east coast of Australia. Captain Baker thought at first that he was in the presence of an unknown sandbank. He even prepared to determine its exact position when 2 columns of water projected by the inexplicable object shot with a hissing noise 150 feet up into the air. Now, unless the sandbank had been submitted to the intermittent eruption of a geyser, the Governor Higginson had to do neither neither more nor less than with an aquatic mammal unknown till then, which threw up from its blowholes columns of water mixed with air and vapor. Similar facts were observed. I have, like, I just read all of that. Was that one? That was like 4 or 5 sentences? That was a lot of words. And I do not understand most of them. Well, I understand most of them. I don't understand how they fit together. Similar facts were observed on the 23rd of July in the same year in the Pacific Ocean by the Columbus of the West India and Pacific Steam Navigation Company. But this extraordinary crustaceous creature could transport itself from one place to another with surprising velocity, as in an interval of 3 days the Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it at two different points of the chart, separated by a distance of more than 700 nautical leagues. 15 days later, 2,000 miles farther off, the I almost read that as Helvetica, because font. Helvetia of the Compagnie Nationale, I assume it's French, and the Shannon of the Royal Mail Steamship Company, sailing to windward in that portion of the Atlantic lying between the United States and Europe, respectively signaled the monster to each other in 42 degrees 15 minutes north latitude and 60 degrees 35 minutes west longitude. In these simultaneous observations, they thought themselves justified in estimating the minimum length of the mammal at more than 350 feet. As the Shannon and Helvetia were of smaller dimensions than it, though they measured 300 feet overall. Now, the largest whales, those which frequent those parts of the sea round the Aleutian? Aleutian, yes, I know of that word. Kalumak and Umgalich? Umgalich? I have no idea how to pronounce that. Umgalich Islands had never exceeded the length of 60 yards, if they attained that. These reports arriving one after the other, with fresh observations made on board the transatlantic ship. Pierre, I don't know. A collision which occurred between the Etna of the Inman line and the monster. A procès verbal directed by the officers of the French frigate Normandy. I can pronounce that. A very accurate survey made from the staff of Commodore Fritz James on board the Lord Clyde greatly influenced public opinion. Light-thinking people jested upon the phenomenon, but grave practical countries such as England, America, and Germany treated the matter more seriously. My lips are fucking chapped already. This is gonna be miserable. I'm surprised I've gotten this far in, relatively speaking, though. In every place of great resort, the monster was the fashion. They sang of it in the cafes, ridiculed it in the papers, and represented it on the stage. All kinds of stories were circulated regarding it. They appeared in the papers. Shouldn't there be a apostrophe there? They appeared in the papers caricatures of every gigantic... No, I guess... Okay, so it's not... There appeared in the papers... Like, okay, I understand the structure now. It's... Wow. I don't like that. There appeared in the papers caricatures of every gigantic and imaginary creature, from the white whale, the terrible Moby Dick of Hyperborean regions, to the immense kraken whose tentacles could entangle a ship of 500 tons and hurry it to the abyss of the ocean. The legends of ancient times were even resuscitated, and the opinions of Aristotle and Pliny revived. Pliny? I think it's Pliny, who admitted the existence of these monsters, as well as the Norwegian tales of Bishop Pontoppidan, the accounts of Paul Hegedus, and the last of all, the reports of Mr. Harrington, whose good faith no one could suspect, who affirmed that, being on board the Castilian in 1857, he had seen the enormous serpent, which had never until that time frequented any other seas but those of the ancient Constitutional. Then burst... Then burst forth the interminable controversy between the credulous and the incredulous in the societies of savants and scientific journals. The question of the monster inflamed all minds. Editors of scientific journals, quarreling with believers in the supernatural, spilled seas of ink during this memorable campaign, some even drawing blood. For, from the sea serpent, they came to direct personalities. I wonder how many... Oof. Let's see if I can get through a chapter. For 6 months, war was waged with various fortune in the leading articles of the Geographical Institution of Brazil, the Royal Academy of Science of Berlin, the British Association, the Smithsonian Institute of Washington, in the discussions of the Indian Archipelago, of the cosmos of the Abbe Moigno, in the I'm assuming that's German, so we're gonna butcher this. Mitteilungen. I will not be taking comments. I will be not be taking comments. That is the first time I have ever timed anyone out. In the Mitteilungen of Petermann. In the scientific chronicles of the great journals of France and other countries. The cheaper journals replied keenly with the inexhaustible zest. These satirical writers parodied a remark of Linnaeus, quoted by the adversaries of the monster. Mitteilung? Mitteilung? Was quoted by the adversaries of the monster, maintaining that nature did not make fools, and that adjured their contemporaries not to give the lie to nature by admitting the existence of krakens, sea serpents, Moby Dicks, and other lucubrations of delirious sailors. Wow. At length, an article in a well-known satirical journal by a favorite contributor, the chief of the staff, settled the monster like Hippolytus. There we go. Giving it the death blow amidst an universe... Weird. I would say amidst a universal. Huh. Interesting. Giving it the death blow amidst an universal burst of laughter. Wit had conquered science. During the first months of the year 1867, the question seemed buried, never to revive, when new facts were brought before the public. It was then no longer a scientific problem to be solved, but a real danger seriously to be avoided. The question took quite another shape. The monster became a small island, a rock, a reef, but a reef of indefinite and shifting proportions. On the 5th of March, 1867, the Moravian of the Montreal Ocean Company, finding herself during the night in 27 degrees 30 minutes latitude and 72 degrees 15 minutes longitude, struck on her starboard quarter a rock marked in no chart for that part of the ocean. Under the combined efforts of the wind and its 400 horsepower, it was going at the rate of 13 knots. Had it not been for the superior strength of the hull of the Moravian, she would have been broken by the shock and gone down with the 237 passengers she was bringing home from Canada. Fucking reefs not obeying the right-of-way of the ocean. The accident happened about 5 o'clock in the morning as the day was breaking. The officers of the quarterdeck hurried to the after part of the vessel. They examined the sea with the most scrupulous attention. They saw nothing but a strong eddy about 3 cables' length distance, as if the surface had been violently agitated. The bearings of the place were taken exactly, and the Moravian continued its route without apparent damage. Had it struck on a submerged rock or an enormous wreck? They could not tell, but on examination of the ship's bottom when undergoing repairs, it was found that part of her keel was broken. This fact, so grave in itself, might perhaps have been forgotten like many others if 3 weeks after it had not been reenacted under similar circumstances. But, thanks to the nationality of the victim of the shock, thanks to the reputation of the company to which the vessel belonged, the circumstances became extensively circulated. The 13th of April, 1867... Good one, she. The 13th of April, 1867, the sea being beautiful, the breeze favorable, and the Scotia of the Cunard Company's line found herself 15 degrees 12 minutes longitude and 45 degrees 37 minutes latitude. She was going at the speed of 13 knots and a half. At 17 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, whilst the passengers were assembled at lunch in the great saloon, a slight shock was felt on the hull of the Scotia on her quarter, a little aft of the port paddle. The Scotia had not struck, but she had been struck, and seemingly by something rather sharp and penetrating than blunt. The shock had been so slight that no one had been alarmed, had it not been for the shouts of the carpenter's watch, who rushed onto bridge exclaiming, "We are sinking, we are sinking." At first the passengers were much frightened, but Captain Anderson hastened to reassure them. The danger could not be imminent. The Scotia, divided into 7 compartments... I did take a shower, G, just before the stream. Also, like, this kind of sentiment is, like, exactly the sort of thing that supposedly sank the Titanic, so, you know. Actually, when did the Titanic sink? Oh. 1912. So, you know, the Titanic hadn't happened yet. Yeah, okay. So I can't really fault them, I guess. The Scotia, divided into 7 compartments by strong partitions, could brave the impunity of any leak. Captain Anderson went down immediately into the hold. He found that the sea was pouring into the 5th compartment, and the rapidity of the influx proved that the force of the water was considerable. Fortunately, this compartment did not hold the boilers or the fires that would have been immediately extinguished. Captain Anderson ordered the engines to be stopped at once, and one of the men went down to ascertain the extent of the injury. Some minutes afterwards, they discovered the existence of a large hole of 2 yards in diameter in the ship's bottom. Such a leak could not be stopped, and the Scotia, her paddles half submerged, was obliged to continue her course. She was then 300 miles from Cape Clear, and after 3 days' delay, which caused great uneasiness in Liverpool, she entered the basin of the company. The engineers visited the Scotia, which was put in dry dock. They could scarcely believe it possible. At 2 yards and a half below watermark was a rectangular rent in the form of an isosceles triangle. A regular rent in the form of an isosceles triangle. The broken place in the iron plates was so perfectly defined that it could not have been more neatly done by a punch. It was clear then that the instrument producing the perforation was not of a common stamp. And, after having been driven with prodigious strength and piercing an iron plate 1 3/8 inches thick. Why are we using inches? Had withdrawn the extent of the injury. Some minutes afterwards, they discovered the existence of a large hole of 2 yards in diameter in the ship's bow. Oh, wait, no, I already read that. And after having been driven with prodigious strength and piercing an iron plate 1 3/8 inches thick, had withdrawn itself by a retrograde motion truly inexplicable. Such was the last fact, which resulted in exciting once more the torrent of public opinion. From this moment, all unlucky casualties, which could not be otherwise accounted for, were put down to the monster. Upon this imaginary creature rested the responsibility of all these shipwrecks, which unfortunately were considerable. For all 3,000 ships, whose loss was annually recorded at Lloyd's, the number of sailing and steamships supposed to be totally lost from the absence of all news amounted to not less than 200. Now, it was the monster who, justly or unjustly, was accused of their disappearance, and, thanks to it, communication between the different continents became more and more dangerous. The public demanded peremptorily? I don't know. The sea should be, at any price, be relieved from this formidable crustacean. Oh, boy. A 100% of book on the wall, 100% of book, take one down, pass it around. 99% of book on the wall. Let's I am regretting it a fair bit, LV. I think what we will do. Blah, 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 blah. Hold on. We are going to save link as. We're gonna read something else, methinks. Cause like that's a good question, LV. Let me... I forget what. Oh, Golden Light. Right, that thing. What book are you considering sending me, LV? Because I just downloaded Moby Dick. Penis. Okay. I am going to not reveal all the... Hold on a moment. Vestislos. Johannes Cannibal the Necromancer. Is this... this is not public domain, I do not believe. It is not. Not even close. So, I shan't be reading that on stream. The whole reason I chose, whatchamacallit, was because, you know... There we go. That should... what? 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 Okay, there we go. Oh my god. I was very confused at the moment because, like, it started in the middle... It started in, like, chapter 10 or something, which was just fucking... Oh, that's a lot of... Oh my god. That's a large number of chapters. Etymology... What the fuck is this? So... What? Apparently... Oh, this is so weird. They have the etymological history of the word whale. Swedish and Danish, val. This animal is named from roundness or rolling, or in Danish, vault is arched or vaulted. I'm probably butchering that. Whale, it is more immediately from Dutch and German, vallen. AS? I don't know what that means. It's Valvian? To roll, to wallow. Interesting. Oh my fucking... Can I just get to chapter 1? Please? Oh my lord. Okay, here we go. Wow. And Dreadful... What? You sent me something? Okay. Vestislos. I'm not... I can't read this on stream, Elvie. Like, because I would get in a lot of trouble, I'm pretty sure. Like, unless I am... okay. So, I would... Part of copyright law is it needs to be... If you are taking someone's property and using it, it needs to be transformed in some fashion. Reading it via stream is not transformation. The only reason I can do it with these is because they are in the public domain. The author has been dead for... to be on the safe side, I would read it from a book that's out of copyright protection, which is roughly 2 lifetimes. Other than that, you're probably technically infringing on the writer's copyright. So... You see what I mean? Oof. I am not like... I love how... like, the second response is, yeah, that's fine. Your streams work, you create, it's fine. And then immediately after that, in reflection, I must add to the work you are creating if it's a derivative work. Much longer post, probably why it's not okay. But yeah, no, it does not matter, LV. It is extremely unwise. Like, as I mentioned, you're stuttering and, thanks, LV. Well, I guess because, you know, LV's got a bully, you know, I think we can just call this a stream then. It was fun while it lasted. Hour, that's not too long. The gag went on for, you know, longer. I know! I'm joshing you! I wasn't gonna stop here. Although my throat is, like, fucking... My throat is greatly displeased. Thank you for that, Dreadful. Fine, Dreadful. What is... You're here. What's a book that you would say is a better read and in the public domain, as far as you are aware? Oh, ooh. I have never read... Okay. LV had a strong response. And then Dreadful NG just like... Oh my god. Like, those are... Dreadful, heads or tails? What the fuck's my coin? That's not a coin. I had... What? Oh, there it is. Tails it is? Okay, the king in yellow. Now I get to butcher fantastic... This work is in the public domain. Published before... Let me just double check to make sure. What? Why did you... Okay, it's on Project Gutenberg. That's good enough for me. Else. Pardon me. Oh, I don't want y'all to see the files, though. Open book. Open book. I need you, king and y'all. Why does it... Like, look at this. It just opens, like, 3% into the... Is it because I was... Oh, I wonder if it's because I was... It might be opening the same same relative distance as I got into not Moby Dick. Actually, it might have been Moby Dick, yeah. Okay. The Repairer of Reputations. What? I'm stopping. Okay. Fine. The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers, original publication date 1895. The King in Yellow is dedicated to my brother. Along the shore the cloud waves break. The twin suns sink behind the lake. The shadows lengthen in Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise, and strange moons circle through the skies. But stranger still is lost Carcosa. Songs that the Hyades shall sing, where flap the tatters of the king, must die unheard in dim Carcosa. Song of my soul, my voice is dead. Die thou, unsung, as tears unshed, shall dry and die in lost Carcosa. Happy Dreadful. But yeah, that probably should have been read. By the way, how is the ambience? How is the is the crackling fire nice? Is the Gee, it's amazing how dramatically different those two otherwise exactly same messages are. Oh, I was planning to read the French. I'll butcher the French. I am going to check something real quick, though. Oh, fuck. I think I... I took French in high school. There was something I was gonna check, but I don't remember how to check it. Oh well, okay, whatever. Ne rallons pas les fous. Leur foil de plus longtemps que le nôtre. Voilà toute la différence. That was bad, but not horrible. Fine, Elvie. Toward the end of the year 1920, the government of the United States had practically completed the program. It is so weird seeing that E at the end. Adopted during the last months of President Winthrop's administration. The country was apparently tranquil. Everybody knows how the... Why is tariff capitalized? Oh, wait, what? What? That is so weird. That is very weird. Everyone knows how the tariff and labor questions were settled. The war with Germany, incident on that country's seizure of the Samoan Islands, had left no visible scars upon the Republic, and the temporary occupation of Norfolk by the invading army had been forgotten in the joy over repeated naval victories. My I my pace through this is bizarre, and the subsequent ridiculous plight of General von Gartenlaub's in the state of New Jersey. The Cuban and Hawaiian investments had paid 100%, and the territory of Samoa was well worth its cost as a coaling station. The country was in a superb state of defense. Every coast city had been well supplied with land fortifications. The army, under the parental eye of General Staff, organized according to the Prussian system, had been increased to 300,000 men, with a territorial reserve of 1 million. Gartenlaub is basically a gazebo. Okay. General Gazebo. Hello there. General Gazebo. Dreadful. I made the same joke. Oh god, same brain cell. Had been increased to 300,000 men with a testicular reserve of 1 million. And 6 magnificent squadrons of cruisers and battleships patrolled the 6 stations of the navigable seas, leaving us. I was doing so well for like an hour! And y'all may not have thought that was good, but like, genuinely, I struggle reading aloud. It's been pretty smooth tonight, which is, I think, extremely interesting. And 6 magnificent squadrons of cruisers and battleships patrolled the 6 stations of the navigable seas, leaving a steam reserve amply fitted to control home waters. The gentleman from the West had at last been constrained to acknowledge that a college for the training of diplomats was as necessary as law schools are for training of barristers? I don't know that word, but okay. Consequently, we were no longer represented abroad by incompetent patriots. We were represented domestically by incompetent patriots. Ah! The nation was prosperous. Chicago, for a moment paralyzed after a second Great Fire, had risen from its ruins, white and imperial, and more beautiful than the white city which had been built for its plaything in 1893. Everywhere, good architecture was replacing bad. Even in New York, a sudden craving for decency had swept away a great portion of the existing horrors. Streets had been widened, properly paved and lighted, trees had been planted, squares laid out, elevated structures demolished, and underground roads built to replace them. Underground. Weird. Okay. The new government buildings and barracks were fine bits of architecture, and the long system of stone quays which completely surrounded the island had been turned into parks which proved to be a godsend to the population. The subsidizing of the State Theater and State Opera brought its own reward. The United States National Academy of Design was much like European institutions of the same kind. Nobody envied the Secretary of Fine Arts either his cabinet position or his portfolio. The Secretary of Forestry and Game Preservation had a much easier time thanks to the new system of National Mounted Police. Also, I would like to point out, this feels exactly the same to read as the first chapter of 20,000 Leagues so far. Like, it is very... Here's the setting. Dry as a bone found in the desert. Here are the facts. We had profited well by the last treaties with France and England. It is different, yes. It is a bit, I wonder how much of that is... like... I wonder how much of that is, like, because I've never read anything... Well, isn't Mountains of Madness supposed to be, like, a scientific expedition? So it would make sense for it to be, relatively speaking, very dry and fact-driven and such. But, at any rate, the exclusion of foreign-born Jew... What? We had profited well by the last treaties with France and England, the exclusion of foreign-born Jews as a measure of self-preservation, the settlement of the new independent Negro state of... These are certainly... Suini, the checking of immigration, the new laws concerning naturalization, and the gradual centralization of power in the executive all contributed to national calm and prosperity. Okay. When the government solved the Indian... I don't think I've ever been so uncomfortable on stream. Like, when the government solved the Indian problem, like, that, I don't like the phrasing of that. Like, I get it, Dreadful, but, like, like, they're setting up the setting and such, and yeah. And squadrons of Indian cavalry scouts in native costumes were substituted for the pitiable organizations tacked onto the tail of skeletonized regiments by a former Secretary of War. The nation drew a long sigh of relief when, after colossal congress of religions, bigotry and intolerance were laid in their graves, and kindness and charity began to draw warring sects together. Yep, absolutely, and everything was happy ever after. Many thought the millennium had arrived, and at least in the new world, which, after all, is a world by itself. I have never felt, like, so in tune with 100 years ago. Everything is constantly on fire. Oh, God. Nothing changes. People are always shit. But self-preservation is the first law, and the United States had to look on in helpless sorrow as Germany, Italy, Spain, and Belgium writhed in the throes of anarchy. Why is that capitalized? While Russia, while watching from the... Oddly enough, Elvie, I find cosmic horror, like, significantly less traumatizing than, like, the banal horror of human hatred. Like, with cosmic horror, there is some, not necessarily concrete, but like in some form well-defined thing you can focus your worries onto. Like, what can I focus on to when I love butterflies up close and far away and everywhere in between. I think bugs are beautiful in all their shapes and sizes. Okay, not... Water bugs are kinda... and I don't... And scorpions. Holy fuck, scorpions. Like, spiders? Great, fantastic, wonderful. 90% of them. Insects and bugs? Wonderful. Love most of them too. Scorpions? Hate almost every single one. I have never seen a scorpion where I'm like, I want to be friends with that. Like, at best... Yes. But... I think that was a very nice way to put that, Dreadful. It's a nice quote, yeah. Where was I? But self-preservation is the first law in the United States had to look on in helpless sorrow as Germany, Italy, Spain, Belgium writhed in the throes of anarchy, while Russia, watching from the Caucasus, stooped and bound them one by one. I have a fun story about a scorpion in a... I don't know which... G or LV. I don't know which one of those, like, sentences I just, like, they're uncomfortably close. And I don't know which one I like least. So, moving on. In the city of New York, the summer of... I feel like there should be a comma in here. In the city of New York, comma, the summer of 1899 was signaled by the dismantling of the elevated railroads. Dreadful, you have the English degree. Shouldn't there be, like, a comma there? Summer of... I forget what that unit is, but that could be at the end or beginning. Okay, introductory clause. Okay. That's so weird. The summer of 1900 will live in the memories of New York people for many a cycle. The Dodge statue was removed in that year. In the following winter began that agitation for the repeal of laws prohibiting... What? In the following winter began the agitation for the repeal of the laws prohibiting... prohibiting... Why did I put a weird emphasis on the syllable? Repeal of the laws prohibiting suicide, which bore its final fruit in the month of April 1920. What? When the first government lethal change... What? I feel like we took a very hard turn from, like, dry fact and history based setup to, yeah, suicide booths are a thing. Like that. This was written in, oh my. Wow. Like, these aren't 100, like, the weird thing is, this is talking about, like, turn of the century, and because of the events being described, I was actually, like, envisioning, like, 1950s. That is... Oh, that's fucking weird. Like, he got the vibe right, just like... really early. That's... That's wicked. I don't know what to make of that. I had walked down that day from Dr. Archer's house on Madison Avenue, where I had been as a mere formality. Ever since that fall from my horse 4 years before, I had been troubled at times with pains in the back of my head and neck. But now for months they had been absent, and the doctor sent me away that day saying there was nothing more to be cured in me. It was hardly worth his fee to be told that. I knew it myself. Fucking relatable. The more things change. Still, I did not grudge him the money. Oh, okay, so things did change. What reminded was the mistake which he made at first, when they picked me up from the pavement where I lay unconscious, and someone had mercifully sent a bullet through my horse's head. I was carried to Dr. Archer, and he, pronouncing my brain affected, placed me in his private asylum where I was obliged to endure treatment for insanity. At last he decided that I was well, and I, knowing that my mind had always been as sound as his, if not sounder, paid my tuition, as he jokingly called it, and left. To steal a joke from H. Bomber Guy, foreshadowing is a narrative device that I feel like they're setting up for the narrator not to be believed by someone about something. I told him, smiling, that I would get even with him for his mistake, and he laughed heartily and asked me to call once in a while. I did so, hoping for a chance to even up accounts, but he gave me none, and I told him I would wait. The fall from my horse had fortunately left no evil results. On the contrary, it had changed my whole character for the better. From a lazy young man about town, I had become active, energetic, temperate, and above all else, ambitious. There was only one thing which troubled me. I laughed at my own uneasiness, and yet it troubled me. During my convalescence, I had bought and read for the first time The King in Yellow. I remember after finishing the first act that it occurred to me that I had better stop. I started up and flung the book into the fireplace. The volume struck the barred gate and fell open on the hearth in the fireplace. If I had not caught a glimpse of the opening words in the second act, I should never have finished it. But as I stooped to pick it up, my eyes became riveted to the open page, and with a cry of terror, or perhaps it was of joy so poignant that I suffered in every nerve, I snatched the thing out of the coals and crept shaking to my bedroom, where I read it and reread it, and wept and laughed and trembled with a horror which at times assails me yet. This is the thing that troubles me, for I cannot forget Carcosa, where black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon, when the twin suns sink into the lake of Hali. And my mind will bear forever the memory of the pallid mask. Pallid mask, wow. I pray God will curse the writer, as the writer has cursed the world with his beautiful, stupendous creation, terrible in its simplicity, irresistible in its truth, a world which now trembles before the King in Yellow. When the French government seized the translated copies, which had just arrived in Paris, I should put my glasses on, that might help. London, of course, became eager to read it. It is well known how the book spread like an infectious disease from city to city, from continent to continent, barred out here, confiscated there, denounced by press and pulpit, censured even by the most advanced of literary anarchists. No definite principles had been violated in those wicked pages. No doctrine promulgated. No convictions outraged. Let's look at this. Oh yes, I remember this. It's very good. It's what is this? Oh. Blah, blah, blah. No convictions outraged. It could not be judged by any known standard yet, although it was acknowledged that the... Actually, Elvie, do you mind if I add that? To the stream, since it is rather fitting. Ah! Ignore! There we go. I think we will slap them. That's pretty. Pretty alright spot for him. Okay, pardon me. It could not be judged by any known standard yet, although it was acknowledged that the supreme note of art had been struck in The King in Yellow. All felt that human nature could not bear the strain, nor thrive on words in which the essence of purest poison lurked. The very banality and innocence of the first act only allowed the blow to fall afterward with more awful effect. It was, I remember, the 13th day of April, 1920. Interesting that the first government lethal chamber was established on the south side of Washington Square, between Wooster Street and South Fifth Avenue. The block, which had formerly consisted of a lot of shabby old buildings used as cafes and restaurants for foreigners, had been acquired by the government in the winter of 1898. The French and Italian cafes and restaurants were torn down. The whole block was enclosed by a gilded iron railing and converted into a lovely garden with lawns, flowers, and fountains. The center of the garden stood in the center of the garden stood a small white building, severely classical in architecture, and surrounded by thickets of flowers. 6 Ionic columns supported the roof, and the single door was of bronze. A splendid marble group of the Fates stood before the door, the work of a young American sculptor, Boris Yvain, who died in Paris when only 23 years old. Got him beat. The The inauguration ceremonies were in progress as I crossed University Place and entered the square. I threaded my way through the silent throngs of spectators, but was stopped at 4th Street by a cordon of police. A regiment of United States Lancers were drawn up in a hollow square around the lethal chamber. On a raised tribune facing Washington Park stood the governor of New York, and behind him were grouped the mayor of New York and... And behind him were grouped the mayor of New York and Brooklyn, the inspector general of police. Thank you, Elvie. The commandant of the state troops, Colonel Livingston, military aide to the President of the United States, General Blount, commanding at Governor's Island, Major General Hamilton, commanding the garrison of New York and Brooklyn, Admiral Buffby of the fleet in the North River, Surgeon General Lansford, the staff of the National Free Hospital, Senators Wise and Franklin of New York, and the Commissioner of Public Works. The Tribune was surrounded by a squadron of hussars of the National Guard. The governor was finishing his reply to the short speech of the Surgeon General. I heard him say, "The laws prohibiting suicide and providing punishment for any attempt at self-destruction have been repealed. The government has seen fit to acknowledge the right of man to end an existence which may have become intolerable to him through physical suffering or mental despair. It is believed that the community will be benefited by the removal of such people from their Wow. That's hard to read. As someone who used to deal with, suicidal thoughts, that is distressing. Since the passage of this law, the number of suicides in the United States has not increased. Now, the government has determined to establish a lethal chamber in every city, town, and village in every city, town, and village in the country. It remains to be seen whether or not that class of human creatures from whose desponding ranks new victims of self-destruction fall daily will accept the relief thus provided. I actually feel personally attacked. He paused and turned to the white lethal chamber. The silence in the street was absolute. There a painless death awaits him who can no longer bear the sorrows of this life. If death is welcome, let him seek it there. Then quickly turning to the military aide of the president's household, he said, "I declare the lethal chamber open." And again, facing the vast crowd, he cried in a clear voice, "Citizens of New York and the United States of America, fucking kill yourself." Through me, the government declares the lethal chamber to be open. Oh, gallows humor is the only thing I have right now. Yeah, I know, Elvie. The solemn hush was broken by a sharp cry of command, and the squadron of hussars filed after the governor's carriage. The lancers wheeled and formed along Fifth Avenue to wait for the commandant of the garrison, and the mounted police followed them. I left the crowd to gape and stare at the white marble death chamber, and, crossing South Fifth Avenue, walked along... I feel like mental health still hasn't been invented, LV. I left the crowd to get... and walked along the western side of that thoroughfare to Bleecker Street. Then I turned to the right and stopped before a dingy shop which bore the sign, Hawberk Armorer. I glanced in at the doorway and saw Hawberk busy in his little shop at the end of the hall. He looked up and, catching sight of me, cried in his deep, hearty voice, "Come in, Mr. Castan? Castaigne? Castaigne. Like champagne, but... yeah." Constance, his daughter, rose to meet me as I crossed the threshold, and held out her pretty hand, but I saw the blush of disappointment on her cheeks. I knew that it was another Castaigne she had expected, my cousin Louis. I smiled at her confusion and complimented her on the banner she was embroidering from a colored plate. Old Hawkburn sat riveting the worn greaves of some ancient suit of armor, and the ting-ting-ting of his little hammer sounded pleasantly in the quaint shop. Presently he dropped his hammer and fussed about for a moment with a tiny wrench. The soft clash of the mail sent a thrill of pleasure through me. I love to hear the music of steel brushing against steel, the mellow shock of the mallet on thigh pieces, and the jingle of chain armor. That was the only reason I went to see Hawkburn. He had never interested me personally, nor did Constance, except for the fact of her being in love with Louis. This did occupy my attention, and sometimes even kept me awake at night, but I knew in my heart that all would come right, and that I should arrange their future as I expected to arrange that of my kind doctor. John. Is he talking about killing his cousin? Or is he like speaking in a more general sense? However, I should never have troubled myself about visiting them just then, had it not been, as I say, that the music of the tinkling hammer had for me this strong fascination. I would sit for hours listening and listening, and when a stray sunbeam struck the inlaid steel, the sensation it gave me was almost too keen to endure. My eyes would become fixed, dilating with a pleasure that stretched every nerve to almost breaking, until some movement of the old armorer cut off the ray of sunlight. Then, still thrilling secretly, I leaned back and listened again to the sound of the polishing rag, swish, swish, rubbing rust from the rivets. Constance worked with the embroidery over her knees, now and then pausing to examine more closely the pattern in the colored plate from the Metropolitan Museum. "Who is this for?" I asked. Hawkburk explained that in addition to the treasures of armor in the Metropolitan Museum, of which he had been appointed armorer, He also had charge of several collections belonging to rich amateurs. This was the missing greave of a famous suit which a client of his had traced to a little shop in Paris on the Quai d'Orsay. Oh. He, Hawkmark, had negotiated for and secured the greave, and now the suit was complete. He laid down his hammer and read me the history of the suit, traced since 1450 from owner to owner until it was acquired by Thomas Stainbridge. When his superb collection was sold, the client of Hawkmark's bought the suit, and since the search for the missing greave had been pushed until it was, almost by accident, located in Paris. Did you continue the search so persistently without any certainty of the greave being still in existence? I demanded. Of course, he replied coolly. Then, for the first time, I took a personal interest in Hawkmark. It was worth something to you, I ventured. No, he replied, laughing. My pleasure in finding it was my reward. Have you no ambition to be rich? I asked, smiling. My one ambition is to be the best armorer in the world, he answered gravely. Constance asked me if I had seen the ceremonies at the Lethal Chamber. She herself had noticed cavalry passing up Broadway that morning and had wished to see the inauguration, but her father wanted the banner finished and she had stayed at his request. Did you see your cousin, Mr. Castaigne, there? She asked, with the slightest tremor of her soft eyelashes. No, I replied carelessly. Louis's regiment is maneuvering... Woof! Why? That's... Huh, okay. Maneuvering out in Westchester country. I rose and picked up my hat and cane. Are you going upstairs to see the lunatic again? Laughed old Hawkmark. If Hawkmark knew how I loathe the word lunatic, he would never use it in my presence. It rouses certain feelings within me which I do not care to explain. However, I answered him quietly. I think I shall drop in and see Mr. Wilde for a moment or two. Poor fellow, said Constance, with a shake of her head. It must be hard to live alone year after year, poor, crippled and almost demented. It is very good for you, Mr. Castaigne, to visit him as often as you do. I think he is vicious, observed Hawkmark, beginning again with his hammer. I listened to the golden tinkle on the greave plates when he had finished. When he had finished, I replied, No, he is not vicious, nor is he the least demented. His mind is a wonder chamber from which he can extract treasures that you and I would give years of our life to acquire. Hawkburn laughed. I continued a little impatient. He knows history as no one else could know it. Nothing, however trivial, escapes his search, and his memory is so absolute, so precise in details, that were it known in New York that such a man existed, the people could not honor him enough. Nonsense, muttered Hawkmark, searching on the floor for a fallen rivet. It is nonsense. Is it nonsense, I asked, managing to suppress what I felt. Is it nonsense when he says that the tassets and cuissards of the enameled suit of the armor commonly known as the Prince's Emblazoned can be found among a mass of rusty theatrical properties, broken stoves, and ragpickers' refuse in a garret in Pell Street? What? Hawkmark's hammer fell to the ground, but he picked it up and asked, with a great deal of calm, how I knew that the tassets left cuissard were missing from the Prince's Emblazoned. I did not know until Mr. Wilde mentioned it to me the other day. He said they were in the garret of 998 Pell Street. Nonsense. Nonsense, he cried, but I noticed his hand trembling under his leathern apron. Is it nonsense, too? I asked pleasantly. Is it nonsense when Mr. Wilde continually speaks of you as the Marquis of Avonshire and of Miss Constance I did not finish, for Constance had started to her feet with terror written on every feature. Hawk Burke looked at me and slowly smoothed his leather apron. That is impossible, he observed. Mr. Wilde may know a great many things. About armor, for instance, and the prince's emblazoned, I interposed, smiling. Yes, he continued slowly. About armor also, maybe. But he is wrong in regard to the Marquis of Avonshire, who, as you know, killed his wife's traducer? Okay. Where he killed his wife's traducer years ago and went to Australia where he did not survive his wife. Mr. Wilde is wrong, murmured Constance. Her lips were blanched, but her voice was sweet and calm. Let us agree, if you please, that in this one circumstance, Mr. Wilde is wrong, I said. Okay. I climbed the 3 dilapidated flights of stairs which I had so often climbed before, and knocked at the small door at the end of the corridor. Mr. Wilde opened the door and I walked in. My goodness, my throat. When he had double locked the door and... I just hydrated, but I'll do it again. Thank you, Dreadful. If I do this again, I should probably get, like, some hard candies or something, so my mouth doesn't dry out as quickly. But then again, I'm not entirely sure I'll be doing this again. Interesting change of pace, but not entirely sure this is my bag. Maybe I'll make it a point redeem. That could be interesting. When he had double locked the door and pushed a heavy chest against it, he came and sat down beside me, peering up into my face with his little light-colored eyes. I was going to comment as if I actually knew, but I didn't meet Dreadful until after our high school. So, I could not speak with any confidence. It's really weird how, like, high school and college just kind of, like, merged together in my mind. That's weird. Half a dozen new scratches covered his nose and cheeks, and the silver wires which supported his artificial ears had become displaced. I thought I had never seen him so hideously fascinating. He had no ears. The artificial ones, which now stood out at an angle from the fine wire, were his one weakness. They were made of wax, and painted a shell pink, but the rest of his face was yellow. He might better have reveled in the luxury of some artificial fingers for his left hand, which was absolutely fingerless, but it seemed to cause him no inconvenience. And he was satisfied with his wax ears. He was very small, scarcely higher than a child of 10, but his arms were magnificently developed, and his thighs as thick as any athlete's. Still, the most remarkable thing about Mr. Wilde was that a man of his marvelous intelligence and knowledge should have such a head. It was flat and pointed, like the heads of many of those unfortunates whom people imprisoned in asylums for the weak-minded. Many called him insane, but I knew him to be as sane as I. I do not deny that he was eccentric. The mania he had for keeping that cat and teasing her until she flew at his face like a demon was certainly eccentric. I never could understand why he kept the creature, nor what pleasure he found in shutting himself up in his room with his surly, vicious beast. Is this a friend of yours, Elvie? I remember once glancing up from the manuscript I was studying by the light of some tallow dips, and seeing Mr. Wilde squatting motionless on his high chair, his eyes fairly blazing with excitement, while the cat, which had risen from her place before the stove, came creeping across the floor right at him. Demon cat. Before I could move, she flattened her belly to the ground, crouched, trembled, and sprang into his face. Howling and foaming, they rolled and over on the floor, scratching and clawing, until the cat screamed and fled under the cabinet, and Mr. Wilde turned over on his back, his limbs contracting and curling up like the legs of a dying spider. He was eccentric. Mr. Wilde had climbed into his high chair, and after studying my face, picked up a dog's-eared. Interesting. I've only seen that as dog-eared. Dog's-eared ledger and opened it. Henry B. Matthews, he read, bookkeeper with Wysott and Company. Dealers in church ornaments. Called April 3rd. Reputation damaged on the racetrack. Known as a welcher. Reputation to be repaired by August 1st. Retainer, $5. He turned the page and ran his fingerless knuckles down the closely written columns. P. Green Doonesbury. Minister of the Gospel, Fair Beach, New Jersey. Reputation damaged by the Bowery. To be repaired as soon as possible. Retainer, $100. He coughed and added, call April 6th. Then you are not in need of money, Mr. Wilde? I inquired. Listen. He coughed again. Miss C. Hamilton Chester of Chester Park, New York City, called April 7th. Reputation damaged on at Dieppe, France, to be repaired by October 1st. Retainer, $500. Note. C. Hamilton Chester, Captain, USS Avalanche, ordered home from South Sea Squadron, October 1st. Well, I said, the profession of a repairer of reputations is lucrative. His colorless eyes sought mine. I only wanted to demonstrate that I was correct. You said it was impossible to succeed as a repairer of reputations. That even if I did succeed in certain cases, it would cost me more than I would gain by it. Today, I have 500 men in my employ, who are poorly paid, but who pursue the work with an enthusiasm which possibly may be born of fear. These men enter every shade and grade of society, some even pillars of the most exclusive social temples. Others are the props and pride of the financial world. Still others hold undisputed sway among the fancy and the talent. I choose them at my leisure from those who reply to my advertisements. It is easy enough. They are all cowards. Treble? I assume that's an archaic word for triple? I could treble the number in 20 days if I wished. So you see, those who have in their keeping the reputations of their fellow citizens, I have in my pay. They may turn on you, I suggested. He rubbed his thumb over his cropped ears and adjusted his wax substitutes. I think not, he murmured thoughtfully. I seldom have to apply the whip, and then only once. Besides, they like their wages. How do you apply the whip? I demanded. His face for a moment was awful to look upon. His eyes dwindled to a pair of green sparks. I invite them to come and have a little chat with me, he said in a soft voice. A knock at the door interrupted him, and his face resumed into an amiable expression. Who is it? He inquired. Mr. Stelet, was the answer. Come tomorrow, replied Mr. Wilde. Impossible, began the other, but was silenced by a sort of bark from Mr. Wilde. Come tomorrow, he repeated. We heard someone move away from the door and turned the corner by the stair. Who is that? I asked. Arnold Stelet, owner and editor-in-chief of the Great New York Daily. He drummed on the ledger with his fingerless hand, adding, I pay him very badly, but he thinks it's a good bargain. Arnold Stilett? I repeated, amazed. Yes, said Mr. Wilde with a self-satisfied cough. The cat, which had entered the room as he spoke, hesitated, looked up at him, and snarled. He climbed down from the chair and squatting on the floor, took the creature into his arms and caressed her. The cat ceased snarling and presently began a loud purring, which seemed to increase in timbre as he stroked her. Ugh. Where are the notes? I asked. He pointed to the table, and for the 100th time I picked up a bundle of manuscript entitled The Imperial Dynasty of America. Oh, man. I am not at all used to talking this much. One by one I studied the well-worn pages, worn only by my own handling, although I knew all by heart from the beginning. Wind from Carcosa, the Hyades, Hasur, and Aldebaran, to Castaigne, Louis de Calvados, born December 19th, 1877. I read it with an eager, rapt attention, pausing to repeat parts of it aloud, and dwelling especially on Hildred de Calvados, only son of Hildred Castaigne, and Edith? Oh, Edith. Wow, that's a weird spelling. Hyades. Okay, so then it's Hyades, I'm guessing. Yeah, these nuts! Hyades. 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 There we go. Hyades nuts! Okay. Hildred Castaigne and Eldith Lands Castaigne first in succession, etc., etc. Speaking of your Speaking of your legitimate ambition, he said, how do Constance and Louis get along? She loves him, I replied simply. The cat on his knee suddenly turned and struck at his eyes, and he flung her off and climbed onto the chair opposite me. And Dr. Archer. But that's a matter you can settle any time you wish. Yes, I replied, Dr. Archer can wait, but it is time I saw my cousin Louis. It is time, he repeated. Then he took another ledger from the table and ran over the leaves rapidly. We are now in communication with 10,000 men, he muttered. We can count on 100,000 within the first 28 hours. And in 48 hours, the state will rise en masse. The country follows the state, and the portion that will not, I mean, California and the Northwest, might better never have been inhabited. I shall not send them the yellow sign. What? I'm dramatically confused now. I actually forgot we were reading the King in Yellow. And then it just like, yeah. Remember, we're reading Existential Terror horror. The blood rushed to my head, but I only answered, a new broom sweeps clean. The ambition of Caesar, Mr. Wall would probably say Caesar. The ambition of Caesar and of Napoleon pales before that which could not rest until it had seized the minds of men and controlled even their unborn thoughts, said Mr. Wilde. You are speaking of the Yellow King, I groaned with a shudder. He is a king whom emperors have served. I am content to serve him, I replied. Mr. Wilde sat rubbing his ears with his crippled hand. Perhaps Constance does not love him, he suggested. Thank you, Kina. Hydrate, posture check, and stretch. I started to reply, but a sudden burst of military music from the street below drowned my voice. The 20th Dragoon Regiment, formerly in garrison at Mount St. Vincent, was returning from the maneuvers in Westchester County to its new barracks in East Washington Square. It was my cousin's regiment. They were a fine lot of fellows in their pale blue tight-fitting jackets, jaunty busbies, and white riding breeches, and with the double yellow stripe into which their limbs seemed molded. Every other squadron was armed with lances, from the metal points which fluttered yellow and white pennons. The band passed, playing the regimental march. Then came the colonel and staff, the horses crowding and trampling, while the heads bobbed in unison, and the pennons fluttered from their lance points. The troopers, who rode with the beautiful English seat, looked brown as berries from their bloodless campaign among the farms of Westchester, and the music of their sabers against the stirrups and the jingle of spurs and carbines was delightful to me. I saw Lewis riding with his squadron. He was as handsome an officer as I had ever seen. Mr. Wilde, who had mounted a chair by the window, saw him too, but said nothing. Lewis turned and looked straight at Hawkbrook's shop as he passed, and I could see the flush on his brown cheeks. I think Constance must have been at the window. When the last troopers had clattered by, and the last pennons vanished into South Fifth Avenue, Mr. Wilde clambered out of his chair and dragged his chest away from the door. Yes, it is time that you saw your cousin Lewis. He unlocked the door, and I picked up my hat and stick and stepped into the corridor. The stairs were dark. Groping about, I set my foot on something soft, which snarled and spit, and I aimed a murderous blow at the cat, but my cane shivered to splinters against the balustrade, and the beast scurried back into Mr. Wilde's room. Passing Hawkbrook's door again, I saw him still at work on the armor, but I did not stop, and stepping out into Bleecker Street, I followed it to Worcester, skirted the grounds of the Lethal Chamber, and crossing Washington Park, went straight to my rooms in the Benedict. Here I lunched comfortably and read Herald and the Meteor, and finally went to the steel safe in my bedroom and set the time combination. The 3 3/4 minutes, which it is necessary to wait, while the time lock is opening, are to me golden moments. From the instant I set the combination to the moment which I grasp the knobs and swing back the solid steel doors, I live in ecstasy of expectation. Those moments must be like moments passed in paradise. I know what I am to find at the end of the time limit. I know what the massive safe holds secure for me alone, and the exquisite... I cannot do that because I don't know what Steve Rogers sounds like, Kina. You did try. I appreciate it. I will refund that. As soon as I channel dash. I wish there was an easier way to manage this junk. Reject. Everything else? Yes, everything else is complete. Yeah, okay. I have to admit, LV, I am... My vision is becoming incredibly unfocused. You can probably tell because my stammering and such is increasing dramatically. Where was I? I know what the massive safe holds secure for me alone, and the exquisite pleasure of waiting is hardly enhanced when the safe opens. They're short stories, Kina, and I have no idea how far we are through this one. I have to imagine we are more than halfway. I have to imagine. Fairly enhanced, say. Left from its velvet crown, a diadem of purest gold blazing with diamonds. I do this every day, and yet the joy of waiting, and at last touching again the diadem, only seems to increase as the days pass. It is a diadem fit for a king among kings, an emperor among emperors. The king in yellow might scorn it, but it shall be worn by his royal servant. I held it in my arms until the alarm in the safe rang harshly, and then tenderly, proudly, I replaced it and shut the steel doors. I walked slowly back to my study, which faces Washington Square, and leaned on the window sill. The afternoon sun poured into my windows, and a gentle breeze stirred the branches of the elms and maples in the park, now covered with buds and tender foliage. A flock of pigeons circled about the tower of the memorial church, sometimes alighting on the purple tiled roof, sometimes wheeling downward to the Lotto's fountain in front of the marble arch. The gardeners were busy with the flower beds around the fountain, and the freshly turned earth smelled sweet and spicy. Oh man. A lawn-mower drawn by a fat white horse clinked across the green sward, and watering carts poured showers of spray over the asphalt drives. Around the statue of Peter Stuyvesant, which in 1897 had replaced the monstrosity supposed to be Garibaldi. There we go. Children played in the spring sunshine, and nurse girls wheeled elaborate baby carriages with a reckless disregard for the pasty-faced occupants, which could probably be explained by the presence of a half-dozen trim dragoon troopers languidly lolling on the benches. That imagery is funny to me. That's... I am fine, LV. I'm probably gonna call it at the end. How... Fuck, I hit paid. Oh my god, it's... Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh, that's long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 18 and a half, okay. Wow. Let's see if we can knock this out. Through the trees, the Washington Memorial Arch glistened like silver in the sunshine, and beyond, on the eastern extremity of the square, the gray stone barracks of the dragoons and the white granite artillery stables were alive with color and motion. I am thinking about making it a point redeem, Kina. I looked at the lethal chamber on the corner. Is that the right? Yeah. On the corner of the square opposite. A few curious people still lingered about the gilded iron railing, but inside the grounds the paths were deserted. I watched the fountains ripple and sparkle. The sparrows had already found this new bathing nook, and the basins were covered with the dusty feathered little things. Oh, okay. 2 or 3 white peacocks picked their way across the lawns, and the drab-colored pigeon sat so motionless on the arm of one of the fates that it seemed to be a part of the sculpture itself. Sculptured stone. Wow. As I was turning carelessly away, a slight commotion in the group of curious loiterers around the gates attracted my attention. A young man had entered and was advancing with nervous strides along the gravel path which leads to the bronze doors of the lethal chamber. He paused a moment before the fates opened, and he raised his head to those 3 mysterious faces. The pigeon rose from its sculptured perch, circled about for a moment, and wheeled to the east. The young man pressed his hand to his face, and then, with an undefinable gesture, sprang up the marble steps. The bronze doors closed behind him, and half an hour later, the loiterers slouched away, and the frightened pigeon returned to its perch in the arms of the fate. So I'm assuming some guy was peer pressured to off himself. I put on my hat and went out into the park for a little walk before dinner. As I crossed the central driveway, a group of officers passed, and one of them called out, "Hello, Hildred," and came back to shake hands with me. It was my cousin Louis, who was smiling and tapping his spurred heels with his riding whip. "Just back from Westchester," he said. "Been doing the bucolic. Milk and curds, you know. Dairy maids and sunbonnets who say yow and I don't think when you tell them they are pretty. I'm nearly dead for a square meal at Delmonico's. What's the news?" "There is none," I replied pleasantly. "I saw your regiment coming in this morning." "Did you? I didn't see you. Where were you?" "In Mr. Wilde's window." "Oh, hell. That man is stark mad. I don't understand why you..." He saw how annoyed I felt by this outburst and begged my pardon. "Really, old chap, I don't mean to run down a man you like. Bleh. But for the life of me, I can't see what the deuce you find in common with Mr. Wilde. He's not well bred, to put it generously. He is hideously deformed. His head is the head of a criminally insane person. You know yourself he's been in an asylum." "So have I," I interrupted calmly. Louis looked startled and confused for a moment, but recovered and slapped me heartily on the shoulder. "You were completely cured," he began, but I stopped him again. "I suppose you mean that I was simply acknowledged never to have been insane." "Of course, that's what I meant," he laughed. I disliked his laugh because I knew it was forced, but I nodded gaily and asked him where he was going. Louis looked after his brother officers, who had now almost reached Broadway. "We had intended to sample Brunswick cocktail, but to tell you the truth, I was anxious for an excuse to go and see Hawberk instead. Come along, I'll make you my excuse." We found old Hawberk neatly attired in a fresh spring suit, standing at the door of his shop and sniffing the air. Ooh. Pardon me. I just decided to take Constance for a little stroll before dinner, he replied to the impetuous volley of questions from Lewis. We thought of walking on the park terrace along the North River. At that moment, Constance appeared and grew pale and rosy by turns as Lewis bent over her small gloved fingers. I tried to excuse myself, alleging an engagement uptown, but Lewis and Constance would not listen, and I saw I was expected to remain and engage old Hawberk's attention. After all, it would be just as well as if I kept my eye on Lewis, I thought. When they hailed a Spring Street horse car, I got in after them and took my seat beside the armorer. The beautiful line of parks and granite terraces overlooking the wharves along the North River, which were built in 1910 and finished in the autumn of 1917, had become one of the most popular promenades in the metropolis. Wow. Thank you, dyslexia. Metropolis. I keep trying to switch the P and L. They extended from the Battery into to the 190th Street. How long is this? Wow. Okay, not too much longer till we get to the end of the third or second. I know how to say it. It's just my dyslexia was making me want to say Metropolis. There we go. Dyslexia is fantastic, let me tell you. But yeah, Metropolis is a very important word to like the Sonic stuff, so you know, I know it. Also, Polis, unless I'm mistaken, is Greek for city. So, yeah. They extended from the Battery to the 190th Street, overlooking the Noble River and affording a fine view of the Jersey Shore and the Highlands opposite. Sweat and disappointment. Don't forget the taste of piss in the corner. Haha, people pee on the subway. Haha. Cafes and restaurants were scattered here and there among the trees, and twice a weak military band from the garrison played in kiosks on the parapets. What is that word? I can't even like parse that. Ingredients are authentic. Oh god. We sat down in the sunshine on the bench at the foot of the equestrian statue of General Sheridan. Constance tipped her sunshade to shield her eyes, and she and Lewis began murmuring conversation which was impossible to catch. Old Hawberk, leaning on his ivory-headed cane, lighted an excellent cigar, the mate to which I politely refused. Kia. Oh! Wow. That is... Okay, thank you for that, Dreadful. uh, which I politely refused and smiled at vacancy. The sun hung low above the Staten Island woods, and the bay was dyed with golden hues reflected from the sun-warmed sails of the shipping in the harbor. Brigs, schooners, yachts, clumsy ferry boats, their decks swarming with people, railroad transports carrying lines of brown, blue, and white freight cars, stately sound steamers, the Class A tramp steamers, coasters, dredgers, scows, and everywhere pervading the entire bay impudent little tugs, puffing and whistling officiously? These were the craft which churned the sunlight waters as far as the eye could reach. In calm contrast to the hurry of sailing vessels and steamer, a silent fleet of white warships lay motionless in midstream. Constance's merry laugh aroused me from my reverie. "What are you staring at?" she inquired. "Nothing. The fleet," I smiled. Then Lewis told us what the vessels were, pointing out each by its relative position to the old red fort on Governor's Island. "That little cigar-shaped thing is a torpedo boat," he explained. "There are 4 more lying close together. They are the Tarpon, the Falcon, the Sea Fox, and the Octopus. The gunboats just above are the Princeton, the Champlain, the Stillwater, and the Erie. Next to them lie the cruisers, Farragut, Los Angeles, and above them battleships California and Dakota, and the Washington, which is the flagship. Those 2 squatty-looking chunks of metal which are anchored there off Castle William are the double-turreted Monitor, Terrible and Magnificent. Behind them lies the ram Asola?" Constance looked at him in deep approval in her beautiful eyes. "What loads of things you know for a soldier," she said, and we all joined in the laugh which followed. Presently, Lewis rose with a nod to us and offered his arm to Constance. And they strolled away along the river wall. Hawberk watched them for a moment and then turned to me. "Mr. Wilde was right," he said. "I have found the missing tassets and left cuissard of the Prince's emblazoned in a vile old junk array in Pell Street." 998? I inquired with a smile. "Yes." "Mr. Wilde is a very intelligent man," I observed. "I want to give him the credit of this most important discovery," continued Hawberk, "and I intend it shall be known that he is entitled to the fame of it." "He won't thank you for that," I answered sharply. "Please say nothing about it." "Do you know what it is worth?" said Hawberk. "No, $50 perhaps." "It is valued at $500, but the owner of the Prince's Emblazoned will give $2,000 to the person who completes his suit. That reward also belongs to Mr. Wilde." "He doesn't want it. He refuses it," I answered angrily. "What do you know about Mr. Wilde? He doesn't need the money. He is rich, or will be, richer than any living man except myself. What will we care for money, then? What will we care, he and I, when... "In what?" demanded Hawberk, astonished. "You'll see," I replied, on my guard again. He looked at me... Where did that S come from? Wow. My vision is dying. He looked at me narrowly, much as Dr. Archer used to, and I knew he thought I was mentally unsound. Perhaps it was fortunate for him that he did not use the word lunatic just then. "No," I replied to his unspoken thought, "I am not mentally weak. My mind is as healthy as Mr. Wilde's. I do not care to explain just yet what I have on hand, but it is an investment which will pay more than mere gold, silver, and precious stones. I will secure the happiness and prosperity of a continent. Yes, a hemisphere." "Oh," said Hawberk. "And eventually," I continued more quietly, "it will secure the happiness of the whole world." "And incidentally, your own happiness and prosperity as well," Mr. Wilds. Exactly. I smiled, but I could have throttled him for taking that tone. He looked at me in silence for a while and then said very gently, "Why don't you give up your books and studies, Mr. Castaigne, and take a tramp among the mountains somewhere or other? You used to be fond of fishing. Take a cast or two at the trout at Rangeley's? I don't care for fishing anymore," I answered, without a shade of annoyance in my voice. "You used to be fond of everything," he continued. "Athletics, yachting, shooting, riding." "I have never cared to ride since my fall," I said quietly. "Ah, yes, your fall," he repeated, looking away from me. I thought this nonsense had gone far enough, so I brought the conversation back to Mr. Wilde, but he was scanning my face again in a manner highly offensive to me. "Mr. Wilde," he repeated, "do you know what he did this afternoon? He came downstairs and he nailed a sign over the hall door next to mine. It read, 'Mr. Wilde, repairer of reputations, third bell.' Do you know what a repairer of reputations can be?" "I do," I replied, suppressing the rage within. "Oh." Louis and Constance came strolling by and stopped to ask if we would join them. Hawberk looked at his watch. At the same moment, a puff of smoke shot from the casemates of Castle William, and the boom of the sunset gun rolled across the water and was re-echoed from the highlands opposite. The flag came running down from the flagpole, and the bugles sounded on the white decks of the warships, and the first electric light sparkled out from Jersey Shore. As I turned into the city with Hawberk, I heard Constance murmur something to Louis, which I did not understand, but Louis whispered, "My darling," in reply, and again, walking ahead with Hawberk through the square, I heard a murmur of, "Sweetheart, my own Constance," and I knew the time had nearly arrived when I should speak of important matters with my cousin Louis. How many? Honestly, I think... this is gonna be... okay. I can probably finish this, but it's gonna be rough. I am going to take a break, though. So... well, there's no guarantee that there will be a next time, Dreadful, but... I think I'm going to take a quick break, give my eyes some time to rest, get a little snack, and then we can pick up and hopefully finish. That's an interesting idea, LV. Take a page out of Dreadful's book. That's... It would have to be before, though. Because, generally speaking, when I'm ending a stream, I'm pretty tired. But yeah. Anyway, I'm going to go take a break. Everyone stretch, hydrate, all that sort of stuff. I will be back momentarily. Bye. Okay, I'm back. And oh no, I think I'm gonna have to cancel the rest of stream. Oh no. Something so terrible has come up. I'm not gonna be able to finish the rest of the story. Oh no. I'm joking. Let's see if I can manage to drink without choking. Nope. Goodbye. Ow. Okay. Continuing on. How many? Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 12 pages. See, the issue, Dreadful, is you did not account for the... Oh, that's not... I have, I have some of the hard candies that Elvie sent me. And that should help my voice from drying out. Hopefully. Yeah. It's the, peppermint coated chocolate. I haven't had, like... I had a couple of these, but I didn't, like, I tried them, but I didn't consistently snack on them. Anyway. One morning early in May, as I stood before the steel safe in my bedroom, trying on the golden jeweled crown. Wait, what? Oh, it's doing this bullshit. Introductory clauses should have a fucking comma. I am irrationally upset about that. The diamonds flashed fire as I turned to the mirror, and the heavy, beaten gold burned like a halo about my head. I remember Camilla's agonized... What? This escalated quickly. I remembered Camilla's agonized scream, and the awful words echoing through the dim streets of Carcosa. They were the last lines of the first act, and I dared not think of what followed. Dared not, even in the spring of sunshine. There in my own room, surrounded with familiar objects, reassured by the bustle from the street and the voices of the servants in the hallway outside. For those poison words had dropped slowly into my heart, as death's sweat drops. That's a weird image, but okay. Like, I get it, but as death sweat drops on a bedsheet and is absorbed. Trembling, I put the diadem from my head and wiped my forehead, but I thought of Hastur and my own rightful ambition, and I remembered Mr. Wilde as I had last left him. His face all torn and bloody from the claws of that devil's creature, and what he said. Ah, what he said. The alarm bell in my safe began to whir harshly. Wow. I'm having different issues now. began to whir. Allergies are fun, guys. Began to whir harshly, and I knew my time was up. But I would not heed it, and replacing the flashing circlet upon my head, I turned defiantly to the mirror. I stood for a long time, absorbed in the changing expression of my own eyes. The mirror reflected a face which was like my own, but whiter, and so thin that I hardly recognized it, and all the time I kept repeating between my clenched teeth, "The day has come, the day has come." Wow! Allergies suck. While the alarm in the safe whirred and clamored, and the diamonds sparkled and flamed above my brow, I heard a door open, but did not heed it. It was only when I saw two faces in the mirror. It was only when another face rose over my shoulder, and two other eyes met mine. I wheeled like a flash and seized a long knife from my dressing table. My cousin sprang back, very pale, crying, "Hildred, for God's sake!" And then my hands... Ooh. And then as my hand fell, he said, "It is I, Louis, don't you know me?" I stood silent. I could not have spoken for my life. He walked up to me and took the knife from my hand. "What is all this? Are you ill?" he inquired in a gentle voice. "No," I replied, but I doubt if he heard me. Come, old fellow," he cried. "Take off that brass crown and toddle into the study. Are you going to a masquerade? What's all this theatrical tinsel anyway?" Wow. That's terrifying, Elvie. I was glad he thought the crown was made of brass and paste, yet I didn't like him any the better for thinking so. I let him take it from my hand, knowing it was best to humor him. He tossed the splendid diadem in the air and, catching it, turned to me smiling. "It's dear at 50 cents. He said. "What's it for?" I did not answer, but took the circlet from his hands and, placing it in the safe, shut the massive steel door. The alarm ceased in its infernal din at once. He watched me curiously, but did not seem to notice the sudden ceasing of the alarm. He did, however, speak of the safe as a biscuit box. Fearing lest he might examine the combination, I led the way into my study. Louis threw himself on the sofa and flicked at flies. Flicked at flies with his eternal riding whip. He tore his fatigue uniform with the braided jacket and jaunty cap, and I noticed his riding boots were all splashed with red mud. "Where have you been?" I inquired. "Jumping mud creeks in Jersey," he said. "I haven't had time to change yet. I was rather in a hurry to see you. Haven't you got a glass of something? I'm dead tired. Been in the saddle 24 hours. I gave him some brandy from my medical store, which he drank with a grimace. "Damn bad stuff," he observed. "I'll give you an address while they sell brandy that is brandy." "It is good enough for my needs," I said indifferently. "I use it to rub my chest with." He... Amazing. He stared and flicked at another fly. "See here, old fellow," he began. "I've got something to suggest to you. It's 4 years now that you've shut yourself up here like an owl. Never going anywhere. Never taking any healthy exercise. Never doing a damn thing but poring over those books up there on the mantelpiece." He glanced along the row of shelves. "Napoleon, Napoleon, Napoleon," he read. "For God's sake, have you nothing but Napoleons there?" "I wish they were bound in gold," I said. "But wait, yes, there is another book. The King in Yellow." I looked him steadily in the eye. "Have you never read it?" I asked. "I? No, thank God. I don't want to be driven crazy." I saw he regretted his speech as soon as he had uttered it. There is only one word which I loathe more than I do lunatic, and that word is crazy. But I controlled myself and asked him why he thought the king in yellow dangerous. Oh, I don't know, he said hastily. I only remember the excitement it created and the denunciations from the pulpit and press. I believe the author shot himself after bringing forth this monstrosity, didn't he? I understand he is still alive, I answered. That is probably true, he muttered. Bullets couldn't kill a fiend like that. That's... It is a book of great truths, I said. Yes, of truths which send men frantic and blast their lives. I don't care if the thing is, as they say, the very supreme essence of art. It's a crime to have it written, and I for one shall never open its pages. Is that what you have come to tell me? I asked. No. I came to tell you that I am going to be married. I believe for a moment my heart ceased to beat, but I kept my eyes on his face. Yes, he continued smiling happily, married to the sweetest girl on earth. Constance Hawberk, I said mechanically. How did you know? He cried, astonished. I didn't know it myself until that evening last April, when we strolled down to the embankment before dinner. When is it to be? I asked. It was to have been next September, but an hour ago a dispatch came ordering our regiment to Presidio, San Francisco. We leave at noon tomorrow. Tomorrow, he repeated. Just think, Hildred, tomorrow I shall be the happiest fellow that ever drew breath in this jolly world, for Constance will go with me. I offered him my hand in congratulation, and he seized and shook it like a good-natured fool he was, or pretended to be. I'm going to get my squadron as a Okay. I'm going to get my squadron as a wedding present, he rattled on. Captain and Ms. Louise Castagne. Eh, Hildred? Then he told me where it was to be, and who were to be there, and made me promise to come and be the best man. I set my teeth and listened to his boyish chatter without showing what I felt, but I was getting to the limit of my endurance, and when he jumped up, and switching his spurs till they jingled, he said he must go. I did not detain him. There's one thing I want to ask of you, he said quietly. Out with it. It's promised. Oh. There's one thing I want to ask of you, I said quietly. Out with it. It's promised, he laughed. I want you to meet me for a quarter of an hour's talk tonight. Of course, if you wish, he said, somewhat puzzled. Where? Oh, he said, where? Anywhere, in the park there. What time, Hildred? Midnight. What in the name of... He began, but checked himself and laughed. Assented. I watched him go down the stairs and hurry away, his saber banging at every stride. He turned into Bleecker Street, and I knew he was going to see Constance. I gave him 10 minutes to disappear, and then followed his footsteps, taking with me the jeweled crown and the silken robe embroidered with the yellow sign. When I turned into Bleecker Street, I had entered the doorway which bore the sign, Mr. Wilde, Repairer of Reputations, Third Bell. Ow. One moment. My goodness. I saw all Hawberk moving about in his shop and imagined I heard Constance's voice in the parlor, but I avoided them both and hurried up trembling stairways to Mr. Wilde's apartment. I knocked and entered without ceremony. Mr. Wilde lay groaning on the floor, his face covered in blood, his clothes torn to shreds. Drops of blood were scattered about over the carpet. I'm scared, but okay. Yes, of course. Where was I? Drops of blood were scattered about over the carpet, which had also been ripped and frayed in the evidently recent struggle. It's that cursed cat, he said, ceasing his groans and turning his colorless eyes to me. She attacked me while I was asleep. I believe she will kill me yet. This was too much, so I went to the kitchen, and seizing a hatchet from the pantry, started to find the infernal beast and settle her then and there. My search was fruitless, and after a while I gave up and came back to find Mr. Wilde squatting on his high chair by the table. He had washed his face and changed his clothes. The great furrows which the cat's claws had plowed up in his face he had filled with collodion, and a rag hid the wound in his throat. Oh my god. I told him I should kill the cat when I came across her, but he only shook his head and turned to the open ledger before him. He read name after name of the people who had come to him in regard to their reputation, and the sums he had amassed were startling. I put on the screws now and then, he explained. One day or other, some of these people will assassinate you. Do you think so? He said, rubbing his mutilated ears. It was useless to argue with him, so I took down the manuscript entitled Imperial Dynasty of America, and for the last time, I should ever take it down in Mr. Wilde's study. I read it through, thrilling and trembling with pleasure. When I had finished, Mr. Wilde took the manuscript and, turning to the dark passage which leads from his study to his bedchamber, called out in a loud voice, "Vance!" Then, for the first time, I noticed a man crouching there in the shadow. How I had overlooked him during the search for the cat I cannot imagine. "Vance, come in!" The figure rose and crept towards us, and I shall never forget the face that he raised to mine as the light from the window illuminated it. "Vance, this is Mr. Castagna," said Mr. Wilde. Before he had finished speaking, the man threw himself on the ground before the table, crying and grasping. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh my God! Help me! Forgive me! Oh, Mr. Castagna, keep that man away! You cannot mean it! You are different. Save me! I'm broken down. I was in a madhouse, and now, when all was coming right, when I had forgotten the king in yellow, but I shall go mad again. I shall go mad." His voice died into a choking rattle, for Mr. Wilde had leapt on him, and his right hand encircled the man's throat. When Vance fell in a heap on the floor, Mr. Wilde clambered nimbly into his chair again, rubbing his mangled ears with the stub of his hand, turning to me and asked me for the ledger. I reached it down from the shelf and he opened it. After a moment searching among the beautifully written pages, he coughed complacently and pointed to the name Vance. "Vance," he read aloud. Oswald Vance." At the sound of his name, the man on the floor raised his head and turned a convulsed face to Mr. Wilde. His eyes were injected with blood, his lips tumefied? Yeah. "Called April 28th, continued Mr. Wilde. Occupation, cashier in the Seafort National Bank. Has served a term of forgery at Sing Sing, from whence he was transferred to the asylum for the criminal insane. Pardoned by the governor of New York and discharged from the asylum January 19th, 1918. Reputation damaged at Sheepshead Bay. Rumors that he lives beyond his income. Reputation to be repaired at once. Retainer, $1,500. Note, he has embezzled sums amounting to $30,000 since March 20th. Wow. That guy works fast. Since March 20th, 1919. Excellent family and secured present position through uncle's influence. Father, president of Seaforth Bank. I looked at the man on the floor. "Yeah, Vance," said Mr. Wilde in a gentle voice. Vance rose as if hypnotized. "He will do as we suggest now," observed Mr. Wilde, and opening the manuscript, he read the entire history of the Imperial Dynasty of America. Then, in a kind and soothing murmur, he ran over the important points with Vance, who stood like one stunned. His eyes were so blank and vacant that I imagined he had become half-witted, and remarked it to Mr. Wilde, who replied that it was of no consequence anyway. Very patiently, we pointed out to Vance what his share in the affair should be, and he deemed to understand after a while. Mr. Wilde explained the manuscript using several volumes on heraldry to substantiate the result of his researches. He mentioned the establishment of the dynasty of Carcosa, the lakes which connected Hastur, Aldebaran, and the mystery of the Hyades. He spoke of Casilda and Camilla, and sounded the cloudy depths of Demi and the Lake of Holly. The scalloped tatters of the king in yellow must hide Ysil forever, he murmured, but I do not believe Vance heard him. Then by degrees he led Vance along the ramifications of the imperial family to Uat and Thale, from Naotalba and Phantom of Truth to Aldones, and then tossing aside his manuscript and notes, he began the wonderful story of the last king. Fascinated and thrilled, I watched him. He threw up his head, and his long arms were stretched out in a magnificent gesture of pride and power, and his eyes blazed deep in their sockets like two emeralds. Vance listened stupefied. As for me, when at last Mr. Wilde had finished and pointed to me, cried, "The cousin of the king!" my head swam with excitement. Controlling myself with a superhuman effort, I explained to Vance why alone was worthy of the crown, and why my cousin must be exiled or die. I made him understand. Pardon me. I made him understand that my cousin must never marry, even after renouncing all his claims, and how that least of all he should marry the daughter of the Marquis of Avonshire, and bring England into the question. I showed him a list of 1,000 names which Mr. Wilde had drawn up. Wow. Every man whose name was there had received the yellow sign which no living human being dared disregard. The city, the state, the whole land were ready to rise and tremble before the pallid mask. The time had come. The people should know the son of Hastur. The whole world bow to the black stars which hang in the sky over Carcosa. Man, my allergies. Vance leaned on the table, his head buried in his hands. Mr. Wilde drew a rough sketch on the margin of yesterday's Herald with a bit of lead pencil. It was a plan of Hawkburk's rooms. Then he wrote out the order and affixed the seal. And shaking like a palsied man, I signed my first writ of execution with my name, Hildred Rex. Mr. Wilde clambered to the floor, and unlocking the cabinet, took a long square box from the first shelf. He brought to the table and opened. A new knife lay in the tissue paper inside, and I picked it up and handed it to Vance, along with the order and the plan of Hawkburk's apartment. Then Mr. Wilde told Vance he could go, and he went, shambling like an outcast of the slums. I sat for a while watching the daylight fade behind the square. Sat for a while watching the daylight fade behind the square tower of the Judson Memorial Church, and finally, gathering up the manuscript and notes, took my hat and started for the door. Mr. Wilde watched me in silence. When I had stepped into the hall, I looked back. Mr. Wild's small eyes were still fixed on me. Behind him, shadows gathered in the fading light. Then I closed the door behind me and went out into the darkening streets. I had eaten nothing since breakfast, but was not hungry. A wretched, half-starved creature who stood looking across the street at the lethal chamber noticed me and came up to tell me a tale of misery. I gave him money. I don't know why, and he went away without thanking me. An hour later, another outcast approached and whined his story. I had a blank bit of paper in my pocket on which was traced a yellow sign. I handed it to him. He looked at it stupidly for a moment, and then with an uncertain glance at me, folded it with what seemed to me exaggerated care and placed it in his bosom. The electric lights were sparkling among the trees, and the new moon shone in the sky above the lethal chamber. It was tiresome waiting in the square. I wandered from the Marble Arch to the artillery stables and back again to the Lotto's fountain. The flowers and grass exhaled a fragrance which troubled me. The jet of the fountain played in the moonlight, and the musical splash of the falling drops reminded me of the tinkle of chained mail in Hawberk's shop. Wow. I can get through this. But it was not so fascinating, and the dull sparkle of the moonlight on the water brought no such sensation of exquisite pleasure. As when the wow. As when the sunshine played over the polished street of a corselet on Hawberk's knee. I watched the bats darting and turning above the water plants and in the fountain basin, but their rapid, jerky flight set my nerves on edge, and I went away again to walk aimlessly to and fro among the trees. Wow. The artillery stables were dark, but in the cavalry barracks, the officers' windows were brilliantly lighted. And the sally port was constantly filled with troopers in fatigue, carrying straw and harness and baskets filled with tin dishes. Twice the mounted sentry at the gate was changed while I wandered up and down the asphalt walk. I looked at my watch. It was nearly time. The lights in the barracks went out one by one, and barred gate was closed. Every minute or two, an officer passed in through the side wicket, leaving a rattle of accoutrements and a jingle of spurs on the night air. The square had become very silent. The last homeless loiterer had been driven away by the gray-coated park policeman. The car tracks along the Wooster Street were deserted, and the only sound which broke the stillness was the stamping of the sentry's horse and the ring of his saber against the saddle pommel. In the barracks, the officers' quarters were still lighted, and the military servants passed and repassed before the bay windows. Come on. 12 o'clock sounded from the new spire of St. Francis Xavier, and the last stroke of the sad-toned... Have a good night, Kina. In the last stroke of the sad-toned bell, a figure passed through the wicket beside the portcullis and returned the salute of the sentry. and crossing the street entered the square and advanced toward the Benedict apartment house. "Louis," I called. The man pivoted on his spurred heels and came straight toward me. "Is that you, Hildred?" "Yes, you are on time." I took his offered hand and we strolled toward the lethal chamber. He rattled on about his wedding and the graces of Constance and their future prospects, calling my attention to his captain's shoulder straps and the triple gold arabesque. I don't know. On his sleeve and fatigue cap. I believe I listened as much to the music of his spurs and saber as I did to his boyish babble, and at last we stood under the elms of the 4th Street corner of the square opposite the lethal chamber. Then he laughed and asked me what I wanted with him. I motioned him to a seat on a bench under the electric light and sat down beside him. He looked at me curiously, with that same searching glance which I hate and fear so in doctors. I felt the insult of his look, but he did not know it, and I carefully concealed my feelings. "Well, old chap," he inquired, "what can I do for you?" I drew from my pocket the manuscript and notes of the Imperial Dynasty of America, and looking at him in the eye, said, "I will tell you. On your word as a soldier, promise me to read this manuscript from beginning to end without asking me a question. Promise me to read these notes in the same way, and promise me to listen to what I have to tell later." "I promise, if you wish it," he said pleasantly. "Give me the paper, Hildred." He began to read, raising his eyebrows with a puzzled, whimsical air, which made me tremble with suppressed anger. As he advanced, his eyebrows contracted, and his lips seemed to form the word "rubbish." Then he looked slightly bored, but apparently for my sake read, with an attempt at interest which presently ceased to be an effort. He started when, in closely written pages, he came to his own name. And when he came to mine, he lowered the paper and looked sharply at me for a moment. But he kept his word and resumed his reading, and I let the half-formed question die on his lips unanswered. When he came to the end and read the signature of Mr. Wilde, he folded the paper carefully and returned it to me. I handed him the notes, and he settled back, pushing his fatigue cap up to his forehead with a boyish gesture, which I remembered so well in school. I watched his face as he read, and when he finished, I took the notes in the manuscript and placed them in my pocket. When I unfolded a scroll marked with the yellow sign, he saw the sign, but he did not seem to recognize it, and I called his attention to it somewhat sharply. "Well, I see it. What is it?" "It's the yellow sign," I said, angrily. "Oh, that's it, is it?" said Louis, in that flattering voice which Dr. Archer used to employ with me, and would probably employ it again had I not settled his affair for him. I kept my rage down and answered as steadily as possible. "Listen, you have engaged your word?" "I am listening, old chap," he replied soothingly. I began to speak very calmly. "Dr. Archer, having by some means become possessed of the secret of the imperial succession, attempted to deprive me of my right, alleging that because of a fall from my horse 4 years ago, I had become mentally deficient. He presumed to place me under restraint in his own house in hopes of either driving me insane or poisoning me. I have not forgotten it. I visited him last night, and the interview was final." Louis turned quite pale, but did not move. I resumed triumphantly. "There are yet 3 people to be interviewed in the interests of Mr. Wilde and myself. They are my cousin Louis, Mr. Hawberk, and his daughter Constance." Louis sprang to his feet, and I arose also, and flung the paper marked with the yellow sign to the ground. I don't need That to tell you what I have to say, I cried with a laugh of triumph. You must renounce the crown to me. Do you hear? To me! Louis looked at me with a startled air, but recovering himself, said kindly, Of course I renounce the... What is it I must renounce? The crown, I said angrily. Of course, he answered. I renounce it. Come, old chap, I'll walk back to your rooms with you. Don't try any of your doctor's tricks on me, I cried, trembling with fury. Don't act as if you think I am insane. What nonsense, he replied. Come, it's getting late, Hildred. No, I shouted. You must listen. You cannot marry. I forbid it. Do you hear? I forbid it. You shall renounce the crown, and in reward I grant you exile, but if you refuse, you shall die. He tried to calm me, but I was roused at last, and drawing my long knife, barred his way. Then I told him how they would find Dr. Archer in the cellar with his throat open, and I laughed in his face when I thought of Vance and his knife, and the order signed by me. Ah, you are the king, I cried, but I shall be king. Who are you to keep me from Who are you to keep me from empire all over the habitable earth? I was born the cousin of a king, but I shall be king. Louis stood white and rigid before me. Suddenly a man came running up the 4th Street, entered the gate of the Lethal Temple, traversed the path to the bronze doors at full speed, and plunged into the depth chamber with a cry of one demented, and I laughed until I wept tears. For I had recognized Vance, and knew that Hawberk and his daughter were no longer in my way. Go, I cried to Louis. You have ceased to be a menace. You will never marry Constance now. And if you marry anyone else in your exile, I will visit you as I did my doctor last night. Mr. Wilde takes charge of you tomorrow. Then I turned and darted into South 5th Avenue, and with a cry of terror, Louis dropped his belt and saber and followed me like the wind. I heard him close behind me at the corner of Bleecker Street, and I dashed into the doorway under Hawberk's sign. He cried, Halt or I fire! But when he saw that I flew up the stairs leaving Hawberk's shop below, he left me, and I heard him hammering and shouting at their door as though it were possible to arouse the dead. Mr. Wilde's door was open, and I entered crying, It is done, it is done! Let the nations rise and look upon their king! But I could not find Mr. Wilde, so I went to the cabinet and took the splendid diadem from its case. Then I drew on the white silk robe embroidered with the yellow sign, and placed the crown upon my head. At last I was king, king by my right in Hastur, king because I knew the mystery of the Hyades, and my mind had sounded the depths of the Lake of Holly. I was king. The first gray pencilings of dawn would raise a tempest which would shake 2 hemispheres. Then, as I stood, my every nerve pitched to the highest tension, faint with the joy and splendor of my thought. Without, in the dark passage, a man groaned. I seized the tallow dip and sprang to the door. The cat passed me like a demon, and the tallow dip went out. But my long knife flew swifter than she, and I heard her screech. I knew that my knife had found her. For a moment I listened to her trembling, thumping about in the darkness, and then when her frenzy ceased, I lighted a lamp and raised it over my head. Mr. Wilde lay on the floor, his throat torn open. At first I thought he was dead, but as I looked, a green sparkle came to his sunken eyes. His mutilated hand trembled, and then a spasm stretched his mouth from ear to ear. For a moment my terror and despair gave place to hope, but as I bent over him, his eyeballs rolled clean around in his head, and he died. Then, while I stood transfixed with rage and despair, seeing my crown, my empire, every hope and every ambition, my very life, lying prostrate there with the dead master, they came, seized me from behind, bound me until my veins stood out like cords, and my voice failed with the paroxysms of my frenzied screams. But I still raged, bleeding and infuriated among them, and more than one policeman felt my sharp teeth. Then, when I could no longer move, they came nearer. I saw old Hawberk, and behind him my cousin Louis's ghastly face, and farther away in the corner, In the corner, a woman, Constance, weeping softly. Ah, I see it now, I shrieked. You have seized the throne and the empire. Woe! Woe to you who are crowned with the king of the yellow... Bleh. Woe to you who are crowned with the crown of the Yellow King. Editor's note. Mr. Castagna died yesterday in the asylum for the criminally insane. That escalated quickly. I am amused because, like, I don't know, for like half of that, things were utterly banal. Just... I don't know how to describe it. Like, things were fine, kind of boring. And then with Mr. Wild, things picked up a bit. And then a little bit after Mr. Wild, things shot off into the stratosphere. But yes, I think that will be enough for tonight because I am fucking tired. My God. Let's see if there's anyone to raid. I kind of doubt it. Wait. Alright, we'll raid Silver. Silver's streaming. Silver good bean. We'll see. I will contemplate it. I need to figure out something, because, like, holy smokes, this kicks my ass so hard. Like, this was a relatively short stream. Like, we're not even at 3.5 hours yet. And I think this is the most tired I've ever been at the end of any stream. Like, including the, what was that, 17-hour one I had? But, At any rate, thank you all very much for hanging out. We will consider this. I need to add the crackling fire to the end stream. But yeah, you all have a very good evening. I will catch you guys later. Take care. Bye.